Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to another Star Wars news update. In today's video we have a range of things to discuss, and we begin with Taika Waititi's 2025 Star Wars movie. This has been making the rounds and there's a lot of hyperbole attached to the headline, but let's break it all down. In a new interview with Rolling Stone, Taika Waititi sat down to discuss Thor Love and Thunder, as well as his upcoming Star Wars movie. Now, as you guys are probably aware, and I've covered this in the past, in recent weeks and months, the director's dropped hints that he's still in the writing phase for his Galaxy Far Far Away venture, and he's trying to move away from the Skywalker Saga, not being reliant on any of the trilogies. Now, during the interview, he was asked the following: "The fact is, the modern history of Star Wars is littered with abandoned projects. Lucasfilm head Kathleen Kennedy does not hesitate to jettison movie ideas that don't seem to be working. How do you deal with that knowledge as you start to work on this?" And this is what Taika replied: "Might happen to me, and I think Taika of 10 years ago would be so panicked and nervous at the prospect of that. But if it's not right, it's not right. If it's not ready, it's not ready. With Star Wars, I don't want to rush. It's something I would not want to just leap into and not feel it's unique. It's my film and it makes sense, because that would be a disaster." He went on to say, "I'm writing at the moment, so I'm gonna do my best to come up with an idea that everyone loves." And you can't really fault him here. I think we would all rather wait for a good Star Wars movie than something that's just pumped out for the sake of it. But there is a decent point to be made about Lucasfilm over-promising movies only for them to be scrapped. I really hope it doesn't happen with Taika's movie, but it might. You never know. And if it does, then we're left without a planned cinematic release for Star Wars until 2027, which would be very sad for a franchise that is aiming to retain its big screen presence, as well as the Disney Plus stuff. So next in the interview, Taika brings up Natalie Portman, and this is the one comment that's been making the rounds over the last few hours. Taika was asked by Natalie Portman, "What's next? What are you gonna do after Love and Thunder?" And he replied, "I'm trying to work on a Star Wars thing. Have you ever wanted to be in a Star Wars movie?" And she said, "I've been in Star Wars movies." And he replied, "I forgot about those ones." So Taika, in a moment of forgetfulness, completely forgot that Natalie Portman was Padme Amidala in the prequel trilogy. Now, I've seen the reactions to this online and most of them are over the top dramatic. He probably just had a moment of forgetfulness because he knows the prequels, he's brought them up in the past, and in all honesty, my dear friends, I bet you that Taika and Natalie had a good old laugh about this afterwards. It's really not that deep. The guy is quirky and talented, and besides, his Star Wars movie has nothing to do with the prequels whatsoever. He's not going to use any of the existing lore, and it's really going to be its own thing. So even in the extremely unlikely events that he legitimately did not know that Natalie was Padme, it has no bearing on his Star Wars movie. And while it is pretty funny that Waititi forgot about Portman's role in the prequels, it certainly speaks to the amount of time that's passed since those films came out, and to the fact that Taika is an original trilogy guy who probably hasn't seen the prequels since they released. Now, going back to his upcoming Star Wars movie, I'm just gonna say it, there is a good chance we'll never see it. Knowing Lucasfilm's history with these things, and given how shaky some of Taika's comments are, I'm not even sure he's certain his movie is going to get made. The other day he came out and said that nothing concrete has been greenlit. And considering there were projects that were greenlit and meant to go ahead, and were cancelled last minute like Rogue Squadron, anything is possible. So at this stage, there is a lot of uncertainty. Now looking to the not so distant future, Taika is going to star and direct in The Mandalorian Season 3. He directed a killer Season 1 finale. So now my dear Mandalorians, we're going to talk about the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, because production designer Todd Cheniowski has spoken up about a quote, rushed production. So much info on the series is dropping after the fact, and we've covered all of the comments by Stuart Beattie, the show's former writer, and now more creators behind the scenes are speaking up. Let's dive into it. Ewan McGregor's return to the Galaxy Far Far Away has come and gone, at least for the first season of Kenobi. The series on the whole had mixed reviews, although generally it was received fairly positively, with a particularly strong episode 6, the finale, and many of us are still getting over that very emotional encounter. But even with that, unfortunately there were still issues that dragged the experience down for many viewers. And while the project had 6 episodes and a sizable budget, many noted that at points it did feel cheap, but that is the nature of TV budgets compared to movie budgets. And then you have to factor in the limitations of the volume. Well, in an interview with YouTuber Carl Catan, Obi-Wan production designer Todd Cheniowski talked about how the series had a rush schedule, especially given everything that needed to be done within the show. This is what Todd said: "You're moving at such a fast pace. I know 90-something days sounds like an incredible number, but you're moving so fast." And when I started the show, which was in the fall of 2020, and then we went to camera in the late spring of 2021, that's 5.5–6 months of time when you start to do the math. So let's say it's 5 times 4, it's 20 weeks, 22 weeks times 5 days. So you've got about 100 days of prep. And on a 100-day shoot, you've probably got, at least on that Star Wars show, we had about 100 plus sets. So that means every day you have to design, paint, light, and finish a set. Now, obviously that's not the way it works because you have till the end of the schedule, but when you actually start putting it up on the calendar, it's frightening at the level of which you've got to check these boxes. Now, intensity is expected for any major production, especially when you're dealing with Disney and Lucasfilm. But the big question a lot of fans have is, did this rush timeline truly affect the final product? Well, it certainly sounds that way. The 100-day timeline is pretty common for most TV shows, and generally speaking, because of how much content a series needs to complete, those productions work at a faster pace than feature films. But one theory is that the scope and the scale of the series, or what it was trying to achieve, was too ambitious, and that could have made the time crunch even harder to deal with. And so finally, my dear friends, it's been a hot minute since we've spoken on the channel about Jedi Survivor, the much anticipated sequel to Jedi Fallen Order. Now, something which has been focal amongst fan discussion of the game is ways it can improve upon and build on Fallen Order, and I came across a really solid opinion piece by Game Rant, and they believe the sequel should take us to a wider variety of planets, but specifically more populated ones. Needless to say, the visuals of the first game were outstanding, the environments were diverse and explorative and enhanced the player's experience tenfold, but the argument they're making here is that Survivor should take us to planets that have more life on them. Many of the planets in the first game did have life on them, but they were void of settlements. The galaxy is filled with populated planets, and Jedi Survivor could bring players to these landscapes, and given the possible connections to the Bad Batch Season 2 and the Andor series, they could use those shows as examples. In Andor, we're going to come across Fest, where there are settlements of Force sensitives, little tribes. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order featured 8 different areas for the players to travel between. 5 of these locations were able to be fully explored, while the other 3 were locked behind certain missions. These planets gave players collectibles to gather and foes to defeat, but apart from the odd creature and beyond enemies, they were void of any sort of major life. The zones were also built with force powers and wall running in mind, and that made the planets feel like no one would live on them. So in many ways, the zones in Fallen Order felt like areas to test force powers on before you confronted the enemy. And while Cal Kestis did visit Kashyyyk, which does have thousands of colonies of Wookiees, in the game, the planet felt devoid of life. Now, of course, the planet served the narrative of the game, which is great, but maybe in the sequel, they should consider giving players more populated areas to explore. I mentioned Fest as an example, but maybe we could see Alderaan before it gets blown up, or maybe even the seedy underbelly of Coruscant. But either way, I cannot wait for the intensity of this game. And one more thing before I go, guys, the first issue of the Mandalorian comics, the adapted comics of the series, comes out on July 13th, but StarWars.com have given us our first sneak peek. And I must admit, it translates so well in comic form. Here we have a comic version of the opening scene with the Mithril and Mando. Awesome stuff. But with that said, my dear friends, share your thoughts in the comments down below, and that brings us to the end of this Star Wars news update. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and if you want more videos not found here on YouTube, then click the link down there in the description. But until the next one, my dear friends, may the Force be with you always. I'm Star Wars Meg. Have a good one.